Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 2 of The Last of Us. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, we have that opening in Jakarta, which I think is interesting, considering like that seems like to be the point where this kind of was like the patient zero situation of it all to some extent. We still didn't even know where it truly began, but that was something they referenced in episode 1. They're like, oh yeah, something was going down in Jakarta, because they had that whole bit back and forth about like, oh, they didn't realize like Jakarta was a city in Indonesia and everything. Well, you follow one particular scientist who's basically brought in by, like, I guess, like, officers from, like, the government and stuff, or maybe there's just, like, high-ranking, well, they seem like maybe just military people in general, but they bring her in to ask her about the cordyceps, because it's like, yeah, check this out. She's like, yeah, this looks like a specific type of cordyceps. It's like, why'd you put it in the dish? She's like, yeah, it's taken from a human. It's like, no, that's not possible. Well, and they show her, and, I don't know if that's come up before, that like the fungus still lives. I mean, I guess it's like once like the host is like dead, like maybe, I don't know, because like when she pulled the fungus out of that body of that lady that was dead, I mean, it's like she was brain dead. So it's like, I think the body sustained enough damage, like the body itself will die. And when the host is dead, then eventually the fungi will eventually die too. Because it's like, right, that's why you don't see everyone just like popping back to life. It's like you kind of have to be alive for it to like the infection spread. So it is a thing of like once you're dead, like there's nothing for it to control. That's why, like, I guess it's almost that thing of it. I don't, because like the games never got that specific into it, because the show goes deep into kind of explaining how this whole thing works. In fact, it's like, right, you know, they were asking the doctors, like, is there a cure or anything for this? Well, she was asking, like, right, where did this person get bit? It was like at a factory. It's like she attacked them and kind of bit some others. The police were called. They had no choice but to put her down because she attacked them. But then the other 3 got infected, and it's protocol in this situation. I don't know. I guess that's maybe specifically an Indonesia thing. Was like, yeah, we had to execute them. But we don't know who bit that lady first. It's like, how many missing workers are there? 14. It's like, how do we fight this? It's like, there is no fighting it. There's no cure. There's no vaccine. It's like, well, what do we do? She's like, bomb the city. And that's the only way to keep this thing from spreading. She's like, now can you, one of you guys escort me back to my family? I like to spend time with them. Now that kind of ultimately ends up connecting with the conversation Ellie and them, they all have about the bombings. Because Tess says that the bombings, and maybe, because I know the bombing conversation came up in the game as well, but I don't remember if that's the exact line of dialogue too, of like, in some places it worked, in other places it didn't. Like in Boston, it worked. It slowed the rate of infection. Other places weren't so lucky, and I'm assuming in Jakarta like might be one of those places. But it's also like giving you that insight of like, right, that's where the bombings came from. And an expert suggested doing it in like Jakarta, and I think everyone else followed suit. I guess like other experts agreed, or maybe the message just got passed along. It was like, this specialist who specializes in this was just like, yeah, we need to bomb these cities, these places that are infected, to slow down the infection, to try and kill it, to burn it up and get rid of every trace of it. So once again, I love how the show goes about changing things, because because The Last of Us is one of those games where it's like, there's times to like stand around and talk, but it doesn't come up that often. Usually you're talking while you're moving or getting stuff out of your way type of thing. So for them to have to like pause and take a beat, because like after the whole thing went down, it's one rush of like, oh man, we got to get away. Like they went from one situation into another, like after they, obviously they ended up killing way more Fedra people, or at least encountering more Fedra people in the game, and they only encountered the one guy, and then they like popped off, they left. I don't know if that's supposed to be symbolic of like they encountered others, just like, but it's like, oh yeah, like just like the game, imagine the game section happened here, but we just cut that out from the show type of thing. I don't know, or just like the encounter just never happened in general. But them like watching her sleep, and she's like, oh, morning, and they're like, huh. They're still weary of her and stuff like that. It's like, well, they tested me. It's like, well, how did they test you? It's like, they had me counting to 10. They made sure my hand wasn't steady. And it's like, oh, and was that it? It's like, oh yeah, and plus I didn't turn into a damn monster. So it's like, that's clear enough. Also, later on, she's got food. Like, they're eating, like, bare strips of food, and she's got, like, a full-blown sandwich. It's like, oh, yeah, it's like a chicken sandwich or something. Because it's like, yeah, Marlene's got, like, smugglers who brought it in. Guess it's not you guys. I was like, because they didn't even, like, I was almost halfway expecting Tess to be like, yo, break me off a piece of that sandwich. But it's also like, well, we don't know if, well, you're infected. But it's like, yo, this is old. I haven't turned yet. Because we've seen, like, the chart. And I guess that's not always clear. But it's like, we saw the chart in episode 1. It's like, yo, what's it like? Neck and face, you got about 2 to 5 minutes. Maybe, or something like that. And then the next one was like 2 to 5 hours, 2 to 8 hours. Was like as you lower the body, like it takes longer. Like feet and legs take like 12 to 24 hours. That was the whole thing. But you know, once again, I'm sure it varies from person to person and stuff like that. So Joel doesn't know how to really, like, he doesn't want to believe in this because it's like, yeah, once again, we've heard all this BS before, cures and blah, 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 blah. But Tess wants to believe in it because it's like, hey, maybe this is it. Maybe this is real. And it's like, all right, so I love that Ellie had to confess it because she's like, tell us. You know, it's like, right, because you do know he wants to shoot you right now. It's like, don't get it twisted, Ellie. Me and Joel, we're not good people. And it's like, that's so interesting because obviously, like, Tess, it was always implied. Tess never had to directly say, like, we're not good people. I had to make it clear, like, oh, don't think, like, this is sunshine and rainbows. So, no, we're bad people in some regards. So they're going to make their trek to the Fireflies, even though Joel has his reservations about this. But, you know, Tess kind of does. But also, it's like, I think she was borderline in believing, but even if she's like, yeah, even if it's BS, who cares? We did our side of the job. We get our battery. Who cares, right? That's all that matters. So when it's all said and done, I think I'm jumping around a lot and I do apologize. I was so curious whether they were going to get to the end of this episode or not. Like the way the episode was, the way Tess was acting, and I was like, because obviously the encounter sequence was different in the, somewhat the same, but obviously different in the show. But I was like, and the way she was acting, I was like, oh, so I was like, wait, are they going to get to that? I was like, there's about 10 minutes left of this episode. Are they? It seemed like there might be enough time. I was like, there's no way they'd say that to like the beginning of another episode. I was like, no, they got to it at the end. So like I said, we'll get to it when we get to it. But it also makes sense how we got to that ending, considering like what did they do the entire time? I guess in retrospect, it's the same way too, because like Tess like is the one who talks to Ellie and kind of tells her about, like, she has more interactions with Ellie than Joel does, because obviously Joel's your grumpy stoic character, and so like, but in this episode, like Tess was, what was she doing? She was the one that was teaching Ellie, like, yeah, this is how things are, this is what's up. Joel just kind of couldn't be bothered in some regards because he found her irritating in other points. I even love the whole, like, like the moment they got to like the higher water in like the hotel or whatever, and she's like, yeah, I can't swim. I was like, wait, does that come up this early? Well, you know, okay, like, I was like, wait, doesn't that come up after Tess died? I'm fairly certain, but maybe I'm misremembering. Once again, my memory's not 100% clear, but I remember some of like the broad strokes and some of the finer details. But I was like, didn't that come? I knew she couldn't swim. It's like, he's like, really? She's like, what? Oh, there's supposed to be a pool in the OZ. He's like, no, idiot. And he jumps in and she's like, well, how was I supposed to know it was like waist high? You know? I also love one of the conversations they had I thought was so fascinating is because she's surprised by like how not super infected everything is. She's like, no. Like, I heard rumors like, you know, people saying like, yo, this place is like crowded with infected. And it's like, no, it's like, there's always those nightmare stories. She's like, okay, so there's no such thing as a super infected one that shoots out spores to you. And Tess is like, God, I hope not. Which I'm like, okay. So there's two ways to take this. We're going spoilers. This is The Last of Us. And that's also the tricky thing, because like anyone that might be listening to this that doesn't know the story of the game, you have to tiptoe around that. I'll go ahead and talk about it, because I actually don't know if they're doing it or not. The bloaters, because I was listening to, it wasn't the most recent one. It was the one from like the second most recent Play Watch Listen. when they were talking about it a little bit more, because I was like, wait, are they not doing the spores thing? Because like when Joel and Tess encountered that infected, like that whole infected situation before they went to go see Robert, I was like, wait, we're not doing spores? They're not doing spores. They were like, I think, it was either Neil Druckmann or Craig Mazin was like, yeah, it's a video. It might have been Neil Druckmann being like, it was a video game mechanic, so they're not incorporating that in the show, so that's not even a thing. Because it's interesting, because that's also one of the ways that, one of the early instances in the show that, I mean, in the game that showcased Ellie isn't like the others. Like, anytime a spore situation comes up, Ellie doesn't need a mask like Joe does. It's like, wait, you're just breathing this stuff in? She's like, yeah, now do you believe me that, like, this is for real? But in this case, they just like, jumping ahead a little bit, she got bit and it's just like, well, I mean, honestly, it's kind of a good thing it was me better than anyone else. And it's like, yeah, it's totally fine. So I just thought that was interesting. But circling back to my point, there's a later enemy, kind of a it's kind of introduced as a boss, but then later on becomes like a regular enemy encounter, and that's the bloaters. Their thing is they shoot out sacks of spores. That's kind of their thing, and they grab you and like rip your face apart and stuff. But the fact is we're not doing spores, and the fact is they made reference to that. You're like, wait, so they're not doing bloaters in this? And then you're also like, or is that supposed to be like a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge by being like, that's not a thing. And then later on, Ellie's like, I thought you said it wasn't a thing. We thought it was. We didn't think it was a thing. Because the moment she mentioned like, this thing that has a face that's split open and sees in the dark like a bat, Tess and Joel looked at it and like, all right, we're talking clicker here. So, but I guess that's their way of being like establishing, because they're not doing the spores, I guess they're not doing bloaters. So I guess it's only going to be runners and clickers in this, which I thought was fascinating. And like I brought up before, like they really got into like the nuance, like science, well, not even just like the science of it, but like, because I was about to say like, the game never went this hard into pain about the description of, the fact is you step on like the, like stringly vines of it. Basically, it's almost like a hive mind where they're all kind of connected. So you step on like some cordyceps or something like that, it could trigger some, a whole bunch of, if not all, the infected in the area. Obviously, we see that come full circle later, but it's like, I was like, yo, that was never, obviously never a detail. The little I know of two, I don't think that ever came up. In Last of Us Part 2, but not unless that's something much later in the game. But I think that's something specifically for the TV show, which is like, it kind of puts you on like, pins and needles even more so, because it's like, cool, you gotta, not only do you have to also be quiet because of clickers, you also have to be careful where you walk, because you might just send an entire horde after yourself, because you're like, oh cool, I stepped on this thing, and every infected within a couple miles radius might know exactly where I am and come and rip me to pieces. Because that was also the thing, like, yeah, you might not be able to get infected, but you can still get ripped to pieces by the runners. So there's also this part of my brain too, is a little video gamey element where it's like, okay, Tess is going up to investigate stuff and Joel has to help her. I was like, hey, did you have to pushing the triangle button? It's like, oh god, I was like, once again, I'm probably reading too much into it, but I'm immediately like, oh yeah, because that's the first instance of them doing that, like using that element of like, oh yeah, like have someone go up higher, or like Joel assisting someone to get higher, whether it be Tess or whether it be Ellie later on, and so it immediately made me think of that. But it left Joel and Elliot alone enough to talk, but it's still that awkwardness, because it's like, cool, we're not best friends, but it's like, oh cool, where are you from? It's like, I'm from Texas. What about Tess? Detroit, Michigan. It's like, oh, he's like, it's in. She's like, yeah, I know, like they taught us that in school. It's like, well, how'd you get here? He's like, don't worry about it. Pass. It's like, don't like stop asking questions about me. So she did get asked about by Tess of like, oh yeah, like how'd you get infected? It's like, oh yeah, this particular, yeah, I went in there. It's like, oh, the thing that's supposed to be locked up all the time. And she's like, yeah, I snuck in. And she's like, yeah, I got bit. It's like, were you in there alone? And she's like, yeah. And you're like, huh, interesting hesitation on that. Obviously, if you know the games, you know there's more to that story. That's why I was almost like, are they going to flashback to it? But they didn't, because that's why I'm so curious. I'm like, when are they going to incorporate that? Because that is part of the story. There's a whole DLC built around that element of Ellie's backstory, that what she was kind of referencing with Tess. That's a whole DLC for like a couple hour DLC for the first game. So I'm curious. I was like, when are they going to incorporate that into the show? Like, will those be their own? Would that be its own dedicated episode? Will it be a part of an episode? Because a character associated with it, I know is going to be spoilers in multiple episodes. So I was like, oh, so is that going to get spread? That was kind of like my big thing of like, how is that going to be, like, how are they representing that? So it feels like it's going to be most likely over like parts and pieces here and there throughout episodes. But because of all the infected and stuff like that, they wanted to initially take the long way, but now they had no choice but to kind of take the short way. And they ended up having to go through the museum. And then it's like, yeah, they find a guy ripped to pieces. It's like, cool. Clicker. It's like, yeah, we're going to have to be quiet. And that nerve-wracking thing of like, cool, it's not just one. It's not just one. Cool, it's two. That's super awesome. Oh, that's super good. So having to deal with that whole situation. And you're like, damn. No bottles or bricks to throw to distract them. So, but I did like, they do kind of incorporate that, because at one point Joel knocks something over and it like smashed, like it was like a mannequin or something, and it smashes into some glass to distract the clickers. But I mean, luckily ended up taking them down. But it's kind of very reminiscent of those, like, almost reminded me of the QTE moments where I mean, obviously, if you don't have a shiv on you, you're insta dead when a clicker grabs you, unless you have the shiv. But it's like, yeah, Joe didn't have one in that moment. Luckily, he had an Ellie there, and just they were able to kill the clicker. Then they killed the second one, so it's like, cool, that's done. But like I said, in that moment, especially when Tessa's like, yeah, it's just my ankle, and I was like, and then like how she was getting super aggro when he was like, all right, like, we should go back. And it's like, no, Joel, let's see this through. And I was like, it's that time, isn't it? And especially at the end when she was kind of putting her heads in her hands, just being like, I was like, wow. Because I was curious, like, how they were going to do. I was like, are we as the audience going to find out before, like, I was like, no, they're going to wait for that reveal so that when Joel and Ellie find out, you find out as well. Because I was curious if the show was going to, like, embrace that, like, earlier or not. So... And this time, obviously, sadly, they find all the Fireflies they were supposed to be meeting up with dead. Now, that's super interesting because they never specified, but because Fedra rolled up the way they did, it was kind of implied like they're the reason why the Fireflies died. But in this case, it's like, nah, they turned on each other. Like, right, one got infected, then the healthy start killing the sick, and everybody lost. I was like, that's interesting to twist it like that. Once again, because they're not even leaning into the Fedra element of it. Because, like, obviously, like, this part of the story wasn't just getting away from, like, the infected. It was also getting away from Fedra people. Like, the whole museum section is, the next part where, like, Tess makes her final stand, that was a whole Fedra thing. So that was interesting to me that they went that approach. So it's like, right, this is over. Let's kind of go. We're going to call this quits. And Tess is like, I'm staying. I mean, look, and once again, using some of the exact dialogue from the game. Our luck had to run up at some point in time. Oops. You know, Joel being like, show me. And she's like, show me. And Ellie being the one like, fuck. Well, I think in the game it's like, oh shit, she's infected. And it's like, yeah. And she shows him on her neck and it's like, see this? This has gotten this bad in just a little bit. Ellie, take off your bandage. It's like, look at that. This, Joel, this is real. And in the game, she says this line of like, if there was ever anything here between us, you do this for me. But in this, she's like, I never asked you for anything, Joel. I never asked you to feel the way I felt, you know, because like they kept it kind of ambiguous in the game whether or not like there was something there. Like that's kind of what it kind of implied. But because because Ellie had asked that, she's like, yo, is there like, so are you Tua? And he was like, pass. He's like, stop asking questions about me. But this one, they made it a little more explicit. I even referenced it in the first episode, them sleeping in the same bed together, because obviously that was a little extra thing from the show, but it was implied like there was a Tess and Joel thing, but it was probably just we have each other. You don't want to be alone in this type of situation, and everything we've been through it together. So we got to find some closure, something for ourselves at some point in time in all of this. So find some form of companionship. So, but her expressly being like, I never even asked you to feel the way I felt. Kind of being like, I know I feel a way about you, but you kind of shutting off your feelings because of everything you've been through. You were not ready to kind of pull the trigger on that. And it's just like, shut up, don't talk. I don't have much time, because even now her hand is starting to twitch. So it's like, jeez. And obviously Ellie didn't want to leave her, but it's like, no, we got to go. Joel grabs her and takes off. And for Tess, this was her way of making a final stand. Got all those grenades around, all that like gasoline, and she's flicking the lighter. And then like that one like infected coming over to her, because I guess in some level it already knew she was infected, so that's why I didn't just immediately try. But like, yeah, the fungus inside of it tried to like go in her mouth, and finally at the last second the lighter lights and blows the whole place up. Obviously she gets to go out. Like obviously they made her exit a big thing. I feel weird using the word spectacle, but yeah, it's sad regardless. Just comparison game wise in the spoilers, but it's just like, just in case there's someone that's like, oh, I'm going to play the game afterwards. But it's just like, yeah, like I said, it's a Fedra thing. She just gets shot, So I don't, and because what makes it, like I said, I don't know what's better or worse, because you can seal like, because you're above ground, like you're on the higher like stairs and stuff like that, the like higher awnings and like stuff, that you can look down and see Tess's body after they like shoot and kill her. This time it's like a full blown like explode, and you also see some of the infected running out of the building and on fire. Joel doesn't even say a thing to Ellie after it was all said and done, just walks away. And it's just like, yeah, like it feels, because once again, that's the person Ellie got so close to, but it's also like, right, this is someone you spent enough time with. She was the one that was kind of starting to believe you. You kind of formed a connection with her more so than you did Joel. But also it's like, right, she probably hasn't had anyone, die in front of her at the very least in a long time, if, So it changes things a little bit. It's just like, wow, like she was here one moment, she's going the next. That's why I was like, whoa, are we doing this? Because obviously, gameplay wise, this is a couple hours into the game, so I'm like, man, it feels weird for this to be episode 2. I want to say, like on that same play watch listen I was referencing earlier, Troy said that initially the first episode was supposed to be 2 episodes, but they cut some stuff out and then put them together. So that's why I'm like, yeah, this would have been, if things were going by the original like structure, this would have been episode 3. So I was like, I guess that makes sense. There's no way you're going to keep Tess around long. But I wasn't expecting episode 2. It kind of gives me, oh God, I don't even want to spoil that. There's another show where some deaths happen pretty early. You're like, geez. I'll go ahead and say it. Episode 3? Really? Episode 3, you cleared the board? It's kind of like that. That's almost like, oh, it still felt early on, even though I know Tess dies early on. So it is interesting. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this ends up taking us. I'm curious to see if they're going to end up having kind of like a cold opening like that. Because that obviously, like, the first episode had that type of cold opening, so that this episode, I wonder, is that going to be something persistent throughout the entire show or what? Because it's going to definitely be interesting, too, because the next episode, we're going to be wallowing in that test for, like, that's just, once again, how much is going to get covered in the next episode? Once again, like, when are going to be, like, what points in the plot are they going to end an episode? Questions like that. And I think, like, obviously it's very indicative of the fact is that Joel doesn't say a word to Ellie, just turns and keeps walking. Doesn't even say, come on, let's go. It's just like silent walk away. So, yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.